Alright, what we have here is a pair of 964 coils with a custom circuit to fire them. I'm preparing this so we can fire these from a 84 through 89 3.2 liter Motronic system. But the more important thing about this setup is that it lets me check coil dwell times. So what I have here is a small timer circuit. In the top trace you can see the output that's going to fire the coils. So 0 volts is not firing and 5 volts is firing. That's how these coil modules work. And I can vary the on time by turning the potentiometer here. So I can go just under about 1.5 milliseconds dwell time, all the way up to just over 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 milliseconds, slightly more than 5 and slightly less. So if I want to find the optimum dwell time for a coil at a given voltage, it's pretty easy to do. So what we do is we set I'm setting the voltage right now at 14 volts, okay, which is generally system operating voltage. And now I'm going to go ahead and connect the coil trigger wire, which is this red wire that triggers the igniter modules that will trigger the coils, and then the spark plugs will spark. And the bottom trace is showing us what's going on at the coil, all right, at the coil's ground post. So the minute I ground this, okay, I start to get coil pulses. Now, what we really want to look at is this bottom trace. So now I'm at 14 volts with a 2 millisecond, slightly less than 2 millisecond on time. So now what I'm going to do is start to increase the on time while watching this lower trace. And what you will see is eventually it will saturate, and I'll show you the point where it happens. So somewhere just around right there. You see that curve that just occurred? That's coil saturation. You do not want to be there. That means the ignite, and then after that the igniter modules kick in and start limiting current. So what happens now is we'll dial it back, and we find out that for 14 volts we're at about 1, 2, 3, 4 milliseconds. So 14 volts runs around 4 millisecond dwell time. Okay. Now if I want to go to 16 volts and find out what the dwell is at 16 volts, first thing I'll do is of course dial it back, alright, and then bring up the voltage to 16 volts, and now I'm at 16 volt system voltage, and now I can start to dial up the dwell time slightly and figure out where it saturates at 16 volts. And there it is, there's your saturation point again, it just occurred. So what we'll do is we'll back off the saturation point, and if we slide this trace over just a tad, we see that at 16 volts, 1, 2, just over 3 milliseconds. So I'm going to call that 3 milliseconds because we don't want to totally saturate the coil. Then you can do the same thing at 20 volts if you like. So what we do is we'll dial this all the way back again, and now I'll bring voltage up to 20 volts on the meter, which is way above system voltage, but I still want to know what the coil saturation is time at 20 volts, and start dialing that in, and bingo, I just hit the saturation. You see that? What's happening here is I've gone beyond it, and now the igniter modules are limiting current. You never want to be in that mode. You want to be right here, right where the coil saturates, and slightly below it. It's about 2 milliseconds at 20 volts, and we'll write that value down. And then we can do the same thing for 12 volts, which is way on the lower side, to see when you saturate at 12 volts and come down to 12 volts, and then basically it's going to be up around 5 milliseconds. And right around, actually I can't even quite get there, we're a little over. So all I'm going to do is increase the voltage just slightly till we hit the saturation curve. There it is. So I kind of know that around 5 milliseconds at 12 volts is where we saturate. So then when you're done, then you write all your values down. You just write them down. And now I know my coil saturation values for 12 volts is 5 milliseconds, 14 volts 4 milliseconds, 16 volts 3, and 20 volts 2. Okay? And that pretty much is how I did the coils. Now what I intend to do with this setup, the circuitry that's firing these coils is custom, and I designed it. And what I'll do is I'll package this into a tight package in a tight weather sealed can, and we'll be able to actually fire these twin coils from the stock 3.2 liter Motronic box without any special boxes. You won't need an andile splitter or anything like that. It'll be a custom harness, the relays built in, another little box hanging on it. Everything will just be wired in the engine bay, and you will not have to cut a single wire to make it all work. So that pretty much is a quick tutorial on how I check coil saturation voltages and times. This noise is getting annoying, we'll unplug that. And then again, a simple timer 555 circuit is what I designed here. The 555 circuit will not be part, so from here over is the 555 timer. This will not be part of the end solution. The 555 timer circuit's just there to generate the on voltage for the bin modules so that I can test it on the bench. The only components going into the final circuit is the 5-volt regulator, the transistor, and the special resistors and capacitors, and an indicator light just to tell me that it has power. But that pretty much concludes this video.